Sitting there and listening to these ladies makes it hard for me to follow, so bear with me. My name is Cindy Castillo. I've been asked to speak to you today about something that happened in my life when I was younger. When I was 17, I met a man. He was in his late 20s, handsome and charming, and he knew exactly what to say to a young, naive girl who felt she was ready to be loved by a man. I thought he was everything I could want in a boyfriend, and I even thought this would be the man I would live my life with. When we are young, there is so much we think we know. In the beginning, things were good. He wined and dined me. He took me on trips, showered me with attention, spent money on me, and made me feel as though I was the one for him, that he loved me and cherished me. Not long after we started seeing each other, I found out I was pregnant. My mother had never felt comfortable having that talk with me, and I didn't know and understand about protecting myself. I was worried about what he would say when I told him, but surprisingly, he was ecstatic. He said he could think of nothing he wanted more than to have a child with me. And on Christmas Day in 1993, 4 days after my 18th birthday, I gave birth to my first child, my son. The day I looked at him, I realized that love like that you only experience when you become a mother. But no sooner than our son was born, I noticed a change in our relationship. It quickly went from picture perfect to a roller coaster ride. At first, it was just verbal. Insults thrown. My cooking was no longer good enough. He no longer liked the way I dressed or looked. I was constantly compared to other women who were prettier and were willing to do more for him in the bedroom than I was. I started to feel bad about myself. I became extremely insecure. The walls of my confidence began to crumble. After all, he loved me, right? He wouldn't say those things if they weren't true, right? So I tried to do anything that I thought would please him. I never defended myself, not once. And then one day, the words turned into objects being thrown at me. And after that, even that didn't seem to be enough. I remember the first day that I was slapped. It was pretty hard. And I remember it clearly. I could feel the imprint on my face still because I had never been hit before in my life. But still, I did nothing. And so it progressed until one day I couldn't go to work. I called in sick because I didn't know how to cover up the black eye I had gotten the night before. He was smart, though, after that incident. He made sure not to leave a mark anywhere it could be seen. I started to make sure that the clothing I wore covered up the bruises. I started to lose weight, a lot of it. For someone who had been an average of about 120 pounds not too long before in high school, my weight fell to just over 90 pounds. And if anyone noticed it, no one said a word. I was a nervous wreck inside, never knowing what each day would bring, never knowing what words would trigger something inside of him. There were nights I fell asleep wondering if I would even wake up the next day. I took whatever came my way, and I did so in silence. By this time, I had given birth to our second child, another boy, following a miscarriage which most likely was caused by one of our events, as I term them. So when things happened at home, I made sure never to make any noise. I didn't want my boys to hear. I didn't want them to think anything was wrong. My family, for the most part, no longer lived in Belize. My friends were no longer around. They had gone away to school or had their own lives. After all, we were only in our early 20s. I never socialized anyway. I couldn't take the chance that the guy coming down the street towards us, the one I maybe went to school with or who was a coworker, would smile or wave at me or, God forbid, say hello. If that happened, I knew I would pay a price. So I never looked at anyone, never said hello first either. I became a prisoner in my home and in my mind. The one good thing in my life was my boys, and they brought me much joy. I loved playing with them, spending time with them, but I always made sure they were in bed by the time he got home at night. just in case. I worked, earned my own money. One of my first jobs was right in this hotel. I was a sales secretary here when it first opened. But every week that I got paid, he would take my money and spend it on drinking and on other women. I wasn't allowed to keep very much, barely enough for groceries. And there were many times I had to borrow to make sure the rent and the utilities were paid. He took me to work and he picked me up. He took me anywhere I said I needed to go. I was not allowed out of the house without him. Why didn't I just leave, you might ask? That's a little harder to explain to someone who's never been through it. A lot harder for you to understand if you've never lived it. For almost 7 years, I was told several things. I was nothing without him. No one would want me if I left him, and I would live my life alone. I was useless, so how would I take care of the children? And what made me even think that he would allow me to take my children with me if I decided to leave? I had no one to turn to, no one to ask if I could leave with my boys. And the one time I did try to leave, my son was ripped out of my arms. And I was told that I could leave, I could go, but I could not take him with me. And that if I left, I would never see him again. I was 20 years old when that happened. If I was stronger, maybe I would have left and come back with the police. But all I could think of was that I could not leave my son alone with him, because what if they weren't there when I got back? I couldn't take the chance of not seeing my son again. It's hard to explain the absolute fear that grows inside a woman who is beaten down so often. It's hard to explain all the reasons that make it so hard to leave. Abuse is not just about being hit with a fist. It's the verbal breaking down of a person, the emotional tearing at someone's soul. We become so battered and bruised on the outside that when the same thing starts happening to us on the inside, we are numb to it. Until one day we do not recognize ourselves, until one day we have lost the very essence of who we are. When my oldest son, who was 6 at the time, wanted to help me during one of our events, I remember begging him to go back in his room. And when his father left, after having taken the money he wanted to go out the night, he helped me to crawl into the bathroom. He wet a towel, and he wiped the blood away. And he made a promise to me that when he was big, no one would ever do that to me. Well, I dare the person that tries now. He's almost 23, and he's 6'3" tall. Fierce defender of his very short mom. But that night I realized I had to do something to make him understand that this was not the way to live. When I found out I was pregnant with my oldest daughter, I knew it was time to leave. I prayed to God every day to open a door for me, a door that was wide enough for not just me, but for my babies as well, for I could not leave without them. I often say that my son and my daughter saved us all. My son, like I said, is almost 23 now. He's currently living abroad, but he's engaged to one of the most wonderful young women I have ever met, a strong woman who I wish I was like when I was her age. My daughter is 16. She's a junior in high school, a stellar student with a soft heart, a compassionate soul. She's kind and she's wonderful. And I am so proud of the woman she's growing up to be. So I finally left. The story of how that happened would take too long to tell here. What is most important is that I made it out alive with my children. I have let go and tried not to focus on the verbal, emotional, physical, sexual abuse that took place during those 7 years, and focused instead on how well I have done since I managed to leave. there are women I have known in those same situations who are not so lucky. And I went on to have other relationships, other children. My second son, who was 1 at the time, is now 18, and he's finding his way in the working world. I also have another son who is 13, a freshman in high school, and another daughter who is 11. She's still in primary school. My daughters are here with me today. I went on to carve out a career for myself. Years ago, I was the credit manager and then the general manager for Courts Belize. You may have heard my voice many Friday mornings on Love FM talking about what was happening there that weekend. When I left Courts, I went on to become the HR director at the Belize Audubon Society. And today, I'm a consultant for my own business, Lucas HR Solutions, specializing in recruitment, training, and the building of the HR process for companies. It has taken me a long time to find my way back. It took months of counseling, and it took the love of my children and the support of my children. But I have begun to heal. I think of myself in terms of a beautiful vase left on a shelf that fell and broke into many pieces. You take that vase and you super glue it back together and you fit all the pieces. It's stronger, but it's never the same. Over the years, I've tried to use my experience to counsel other women, both here and in the US, to help them to understand that they do not have to stay, that for their children, they must leave. There is a choice and there is a life after. There are women in this very city, wives of professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. There are even women who are professionals themselves, who go home to face these same challenges every day. You would never know it to look at them. I've heard that before when I've given talks. I would never think, Cindy, looking at you, that you've been through something like this. Why? Because I drive a decent car, I dress nicely, I speak well. Many of these women stay because sometimes it's the only life they've known. For economic reasons, their husbands are the breadwinners and they've never worked. They worry about what society, people like you, will have to say. Violence of this type does not discriminate, ladies and gentlemen. I have always been the white girl until I broke out in a Creole. I was never thought to be Belizean. I was not raised in a poor family. My background growing up was described back then as upper middle class. I got a good education. I had good and loving parents. I was a confident, happy, and full of life girl, not shy in any way. And still, it happened to me. We have made strides in our country when it comes to gender-based violence, but there is still a lot that needs to be done. I saw in the program today that we have people here from the domestic violence unit, and I was happy to see that, because I've known that we've had a domestic violence unit in our police force, but I've often wondered how much training and understanding those officers go through before joining or being assigned to that particular unit. I have seen and been present sometimes when officers have approached a situation in a home where a report was made and asked the woman in front of the man if everything is okay. Who here feels that that woman will say what has really happened in front of the man who has most likely beat her very, very often? Our laws, when it comes to dealing with issues of gender-based violence, are ancient and need serious reviews. Don't get me wrong, we've looked at some. But if you're one of those women in court, you'd understand that not very much happens and the wheels turn very slowly, too slowly. In my day, to get a restraining order, it was almost as though we had to allow ourselves to be beaten so we could show the proof to get it. And from what I've heard from some of the women I've worked with recently, sometimes it's not much better now. To be quite honest, some of you sitting right here help in perpetuating the stigma of being a victim. You ask questions like, what did you do to make him do that to you? Why didn't you just pick up and leave? How could you allow him to hit you? A woman who has been through something like this feels enough shame, enough guilt. If someone comes to you and tells you that this is happening to her, the first thing you need to do is listen to her story. Be a shoulder for her to cry on if that is what she wants, and help her to figure out what she needs to do. If you hear the cries of a woman in the middle of the night or any time, don't ignore it. Do something to get her out of there. Call the police to assist. And police officers, you need to show up. You could be saving a life. Parents, Talk to your sons and talk to your daughters. By my leaving, I taught my children some valuable lessons. My sons learned that sometimes, even though things are hard, you have to make tough decisions. They learned how not to treat a woman, the woman you claim to love, possibly even the mother of your children. They knew that I would never condone that type of behavior from them. They learned the type of man they did not need to be. And my daughters have learned the importance of being independent, to stand tall and to stand strong, to value themselves and to never let it reach that first stage. They have learned that I am always here, that they can tell me anything. They know I will defend them to the ends of the earth because they are my reasons for everything I have ever done. If you are listening to me today and you or someone you know is going through something like this, Ms. Westby has my contact information. I will help you if I can, for only you can decide when enough is enough and only you can make the choice to change your life. But I promise you that I will be the voice that you need to find a way to get you out if that is what you need me to be. Do not suffer in silence. Do not allow for it to continue. Do not let your children see this happen. It is not easy. It's hard, but it is possible, and you can do it. Audience, I urge you to pay attention to those around you. Notice the changes in them, personalities, weight, jitters, and care enough to ask and to do something about it. They need your support, not your judgment. Thank you for listening to me today.